Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry I'm going to have to wake you all up after lunch. I hope we had a fantastic lunch. Thank you for inviting me here today. I feel to be a little bit of a fraud standing here talking about biomethane, because clearly it's something that for us is the future. It's not today. And clearly it's an opportunity going forward. Just a quick advert. I don't know how many of you know who Carnival Corporation and PLC are. We own Costa Crociere. It's one of our brands. I had the pleasure of working there for 3 years a few years ago, and I have to apologize. My Italian is nowhere near good enough. But we have, at the moment, yesterday, we delivered the Costa Venezia in Monfalcone shipyard, and she's having an award ceremony today in Trieste. But we have 106 ships running at the moment. We lift around about 3.5 million tons of fuel a year. So if you think in the maritime sector, there's maybe 300 million tons of fuel utilized. It's perhaps a significant percentage to one company. That being said, we have one LNG fuel ship today. So really, just to put this in perspective, if we look at gas as a fuel in the maritime sector, it's here, it's improving, but we're in the early stages. I'm going to spend a few minutes just explaining a little bit about what the drivers are in the maritime industry as to why we have chosen gas and why others in our sector are choosing gas, and then talk a little bit about what we might expect from biomethane and then particularly bio-LNG. So the maritime sector, despite what you may read in your local press, is a heavily regulated industry. We have very strict requirements for air emissions, and clearly what we're seeing in the beginning of next year will be a complete change in the structure of the way marine fuel is being purchased and is being developed. There's a global environmental requirement for SOx coming into force on the 1st of January, and this is driving a lot of people to consider what are the fuels of the future. We've got tiers that are driving NOx down, and whilst these may not seem as extreme as they are in other sectors of transport, given that the vast majority of world trade travels by sea today, we all have to play our part. Our marine engines are much larger than most, and they have the contribution of maybe 3% of carbon in the world's greenhouse gas emissions trading, or within the world amount of carbon emitted. It's around about 3% from the maritime sector at the moment. That being said, we have to play our part, and we are actively working within the International Maritime Organization to drive down our emissions. There's an increasing awareness of local pollution issues as well. We see that a lot in the Mediterranean, cities around the coast, Civitavecchia. We see this in Marseille. We see this in many, many parts of the Mediterranean today, in Norway and in other parts of the world. And for us, there have to be a number of solutions. What do we look at? What are the choices that we have? So if we look at the IMO 2020 requirement, which is the big one driving the maritime sector today, you could do nothing and just buy compliant fuels. There'll be a significant increase, and that's really just going to what we call marine gas oil. And that will be available. Whether it will be available at the right price in the right location, nobody knows. We can use traditional fuels and exhaust gas cleaning systems, which is something that in our sector of industry we've significantly invested in. But as we look to the future, as we want to make ourselves proof against future regulation, we need to find a cleaner fuel. Sorry, I was just looking at somebody falling off their chair there, and I wondered it was something I said. So if we look at all the different things, what we clearly see in our segment is that LNG meets and exceeds all of those current requirements. The one area where it does not give us what we need or will need in the future is in its greenhouse gas or CO2 equivalent reductions. But to get 10 or 15% today, that's something, and it helps us on our pathway. But what about the future? What we clearly need is a silver bullet. We need a fuel that's carbon-free, and despite everything I hear about hydrogen, ammonia, and all these other different fuels out there, if I wanted to, for example, put batteries in my cruise ship, I wouldn't carry any passengers. I would just carry batteries. Hydrogen, the volume of hydrogen I need to power a cruise ship is more than the current full production of the European Union. These are the kind of facts that don't get out there. The one fuel that we do see has potential going forwards is first of all LNG and gradually increasing bio-LNG or synthetic gas into this mainstream going forward. So we see this as a very positive opportunity. But I will talk a little bit more about the scale, because scale is a big issue. If you're in Norway today, there's new regulations just introduced today. They want to have zero-emission ships by 2026. Well, that means no ships. So you can see why we've chosen LNG. In Carnival, we have 10 ships on order, and we have 1 ship operating today. The Aida Nova is currently operating all of the time on LNG. It runs on LNG on a continuous basis. If we look, and these are some slides I got from Shell, who we have a partnership with as well as others, but if you look at the maritime sector, it's still a relatively small sector for LNG or gas-fueled vessels, but it's growing. And you can certainly see, if you look at ferries and passenger ships, these are the 2 sectors where the majority of ships are coming from. But there is more and more. Every week we hear about new orders. Just yesterday I learned that another bunker company has ordered 6 bunker vessels in the Far East. So we're beginning to see a shift. We're beginning to see an uptake of this fuel. It's available. It's not always available everywhere you need it, but it is available and can be made available. And the clear advantage of looking at something like a bio-LNG is that it drops straight in. It just replaces your normal natural gas, your normal LNG. But as we look through this, you see, if you talk about these numbers are not high right now, but as I said, they're growing. We see a lot more orders coming through. But unfortunately, some of the language coming out of the European Union and other places is being very negative about what are the advantages around gas as fuel for the maritime sector. But certainly in the cruise sector, given that 25% of all the ships on order are LNG fueled, we don't see it that way. We see this as a very positive opportunity. If you look at the projections for marine fuel, as you see by 2035, something like 35 million tons per annum. It's not huge, but it's growing. And that's Shell's projection at the moment. And clearly we can see more of this coming. But obviously, we have a decarbonization pathway as well. So the one thing I try to always tell people about, because very few people understand the maritime sector and what it is we do, our latest ships, the one in the bottom there, the Aida Nova, carries 6,000 passengers. It travels around the Mediterranean, or it will come to the Mediterranean in April. At the moment, it's going around the Canary Islands. And as of later this year, the Costa Smeralda will be delivered, which is a sister ship from the point of view of the technology, obviously a completely different interior. We have a different passenger demographic. Italians are not Germans, and Germans are not Italians. And from that perspective, we have different brands, we have different tops, but the technology is the key point here. The technology is the same. Those larger ships, they take 3,000 cubic meters of LNG every 2 weeks. The first picture is the smaller vessel, the Aida Prima and Perla, which just use LNG in port, 13 tons a day if we were lucky. So it just gives you some idea of the volumes you need to have. And when I'm talking to colleagues and some of our technology partners about the volume of biomethane that could be produced into bio-LNG from small scale, we have a long way to go. That's not to say it isn't impossible. And I clearly, this morning, listening to some of the words that were coming from some of the energy sector, it's really encouraging to hear that this is an opportunity that is not just seen by the transport sector, but in the energy sector as well. So, as I said, we have some partnerships. For some of you may know, Carnival has a relationship with EcoSpray, and we're talking to them about what they can do to help us in this segment. But we certainly see that today the volumes are very small. We looked at putting bio-LNG into one of our ships when it visited Norway recently, and the challenge to get 2 trucks of bio-LNG, it can be done, but it's not easy. But then if we want to do small scale, what is the other options that we have? Potentially, we do something on a lot of our cruise ships called cold ironing. We plug them into the network in port. We could look at powering small generators on the dockside by biomethane or bio-LNG. That way we have zero carbon emissions for the time in port. It's clearly an advantage for the local communities because it has zero emissions. It doesn't mean we have to have LNG on board the ship. It can be put on one of our conventional ships. And we as a company have around 40% of our fleet equipped for shore power and 2 ports in Europe where you can connect. So there's a scale issue here, clearly. But as we see more and more demand for cleaner and cleaner emissions, cleaner and cleaner port calls, we can see advantages and we can see ways of doing this. So that's maybe one way that we can inject a little bit into of bio into the work stream. We're looking at with technology providers about what is possible, both on small scale and large scale. Many of you will be reading in the press that in Rotterdam they're looking at 30,000 tons a year for biomethane coming online, or bio-LNG even being supplied. So there's clearly movement in this space, and we see that as a significant advantage. But really, this is what drives this. This is why we're looking at this. We, as a company, have our own sustainability drivers. We've set ourselves a target of reducing our carbon emissions by 25% by 2020, and we've achieved that ahead of schedule. As a cruise industry, we've set ourselves a target of matching the IMO target of a 40% reduction in intensity by 2030. We think we can manage that. It's not going to be easy, and that will not rely on LNG. That will not rely on any biofuels. That we can do with existing technology. There may be a little LNG, there may be a little bit of biofuel in there, and which will be a big advantage if there is, but at the moment we think we can just about manage that with existing technology. The key, though, is the 2050 target. That's a 50% in absolute reduction terms. This is a graph that shows you a little bit about what Carnival's fleet looks like. In 2008, we had 85 ships. At the end of 2017, we had 105 ships, and I think as of today, we've got 106 ships. For us to reduce our absolute emissions by 50%, it's massive. And by 2050, we may have 130 ships, because the growth in the cruise segment is phenomenal. How many of you have been on a cruise? Oh, not so many. Come on. There's for the Italians there's a fantastic cruise line called Costa. So please, please, come and visit our ships and take a cruise. I'd also ask, how many of you drive electric cars? Okay. How many of you flew here? Okay, not many. How many of you offset your emissions? So guys, come on. Everybody's talking about us doing things. We're not doing it ourselves. So let's think a little bit about that. Okay, that's me getting off my political high horse. I think this absolute ambition target is really important because this is real reduction. How are we going to do that if we've got to get 50% reduction? LNG, let's say we use medium speed diesels, if we take into account methane slip, all of those things, maybe 10%. If I'm being more generous, 15%. We're certainly not going to see the real 30% that we could get if we had zero methane slip. Shore power, for a fleet of our size, if we connected nearly all of the ships when we're in port, that would give us another 10% saving in carbon emissions. I think there's probably about another 10% on energy recovery that we can do. As I said, we've already taken 25, 30% out. To get another 10% on energy efficiency is going to be challenging. Maybe there's more. As we see every new design we put into place saves us around about 20%. So this, by 2050, we'll probably have another 1.5 designs. For the design cycle is roughly 6 to 10 years from starting and concept and delivering the first in a class of new vessels. But remember, these are billion-dollar assets that we're building. One of these ships is $1 billion. And we spend roughly $75 million a year on R&D within my company. If you talk to Toyota, you talk to Shell, they're talking about spending $2 billion on investment in just R&D to look at these new fuels. So what are we going to have by 2050 in reality? To me, there's really the most logical solution is the bio side of things, or the synthetic fuels. Those are fuels that can drop into existing technology and can deliver immediate reductions. But we need them. Everybody talks about hydrogen, everybody talks about ammonia. So this is a possible scenario, though, and really this is the bit I always, so this is what we're doing as a company. We're looking at our operational measures, we're looking at everything we can do. But with the hybrid designs, when we talk about all of these things, batteries, fuel cells, today's fuel cell only gives you the same efficiency as a current diesel engine does. It doesn't give you anything more than that. Despite what the manufacturers will tell you, despite what they say, I guarantee you, if you were buying and fitting it on a ship today, you could only get 50% reliability, 50% conversion. Hydrogen, as I said, there's not enough production facility, and where does most of the hydrogen come from? Ammonia, yes, I think ammonia will definitely have a place to play in the future. How big it will be, I don't know. What I do know is I can get LNG, and I can get LNG reliably. I can get LNG in most places. If biomethane can be converted to bio-LNG, then I can begin to see a percentage every year beginning to increase. That will give me my carbon neutrality. But if I want a 50% reduction from my fleet, and this is very theoretical, I probably need, just for my fleet, just over 2 million tons of bio-LNG in 2050. Thank you.
Thank you.